This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hey, sweetie, how are you? This is the Time to Care the Caregivers podcast, and I'm Isabel Melgarejo, your host. I am thrilled to have you here today because this is November and it's just 2 months before the year ends. So I'm really happy that holidays are around the corner and a lot of the good stuff in the year it's going to happen. Today, I want to talk about news. So let's get started. Hey, I think we have all been bombarded with a lot of dreading news around the world. And it is heartbreaking seeing what's happening elsewhere in the world. It is heartbreaking. The war in Ukraine is still going on and there's nothing really happening. It's just more people dying. And the war in Gaza is horrible as well. And it is heartbreaking seeing all these young children and young people dying and suffering. I don't think that should be allowed at all. We are all humans, and it is very heartbreaking seeing all this news. And also, part of the news was a hurricane that devastated Mexico. Well, not Mexico, just a city in Mexico, Acapulco. This news has been really tough for me because Acapulco was a beach I went many times as a kid. In other words, watching the news right now is very devastating for me, and I am assuming it is also devastating for you. And that's why I want to talk about this topic, because what we watch and what we experience on the news directly affects our mood and directly affects our mental health. If you feel any way like me, and if you feel any way like many other people that I have talked to, then I invite you to continue listening to this podcast because this is for you. There are 3 ways in which we can consume news. We can watch the news, we can listen to the radio and listen to the news, or we can read a newspaper or news in whatever app that we prefer. My preferred method of consuming news is by reading news. And I have been very conscious for the past 5 years in how I consume news because there are many things that we can't change, but it affects us a lot. I'm going to share with you how I came to the conclusion of how I read news, and I hope this method is useful for you. The first thing that I did while dealing a lot with mental health issues was to define what sort of news, or if at all, if I wanted to be up to date with what's going on all around the world. So that is the first step. Do you want to consume news, or you don't want to consume news? I'm not here to judge one way or another. I think that is a very personal decision, and I think there are no right or wrong answers. Whatever you want in this specific moment, that's okay for you. If it's a moment in which you're dealing with a lot and you don't want to be paying attention to the world's sufferings, then it's good that you decide not to read or know anything that's going on anywhere else in the world. That's perfectly fine. And if you're taking that decision to protect yourself, I congratulate you because that is a very tough decision, and I applaud you and I support you all the way. That is the first step. Then the second step is obviously if you decide not to consume any news, then the process is over. You just need to delete your apps and block all the content from your life, and you'll be good. You have to do it. You have to make it hard for you to consume news because otherwise you will continue to read and look for those news. So make it hard for you. And if you do it, you're going to be perfect. If you decide to read the news and to consume any news content, then you need to be aware of what type of news you want to be watching, reading, or listening. And that is also a very important step because it's not the same if you allow the whole news to come into your life as if you decide what sorts of news you want to be reading. In my personal case, and this might not be your case, and it's good whatever you decide, but in my personal experience, I have decided that, well, if you don't know it, I love any new experience and I love anything that has to be with novelty. I'm obsessed with novelty, and if it's new for me, I will be in all the way. Because I'm obsessed with novelty, then that is something that I bring into my life. I'm obsessed with reading news that have anything to do with new research, new developments, new technologies. And if it has anything to do with AI, I'm all over it. I can't wait to see what's going on and what's going to happen with the world. So that kind of content really interests me. So I try to put that kind of content in my feedback, and I have designed, thanks to all these tools that we have today, I have designed the content that I read to have a lot of those news. Politics, I'm not really into politics, so the least I know, the better I am. I'm really not into politics, so I don't consume politics. But then I do like being up to date with the big events in the world, whatever they are. So I do consume those kinds of news. So if it has anything to do with anything big, then I want to know, because I don't want to be in a room where everybody's talking about that and I have no idea of what's going on. So I do keep those news, but I only read the headers. I don't read anything else. And if I have questions, then I go and research. And I research what's behind those problems, and I research more about those people or those situations. But I just read the headers, and I like creating my own perspective about problems. So I rather go and research and create my own perspective rather than have someone else's perspective. This doesn't mean you have to do the same thing, because we all connect with certain people that think like us. So maybe you follow someone who thinks very similarly to you, and you trust their content, and that is perfectly fine. So just keep doing that. If that is something that works for you, go ahead and do it. And the third thing is where you want to consume the content. I personally don't recommend watching TV, because when you watch TV, you actually see the whole thing. And it is very, very devastating to see people suffering. At least that affects me a lot. I can deal with it, but I don't want to be dealing with my mental health after that. And one of the ways to just prevent or to help me deal with my mental health and keep my mental health healthy is to avoid watching content that is hard for me to see. And watching wars and watching the destruction really affects me. Whatever it is that works for you, you have to define it. And maybe I know reading the news for me works perfectly for me, because I can decide how much of it I can consume. I can just consume the title. I can consume the title and the first paragraph, which usually has the most important information. Or I can decide to consume the whole content if it's something that it really piqued my interest, which usually happens because I love research and new stuff, and that is reported usually in the news. So defining how you want to consume content is very important, and I recommend you to evaluate the 3 ways of consuming this content. If you want to watch the news, make sure that you are in the right state of mind to do so, because watching destruction and watching people suffering can really affect how we feel internally. I also understand that there's people that would like to watch news because that's their preferred method and because that's how they like connective with other people out there. Or maybe you prefer listening to the news because you can go through your news while you're traveling to and from work, when you're commuting, and maybe you enjoy listening to the news while you're cooking or doing something else. You don't need to spend time. If you're listening, you can be doing something else at the same time. So it is up to you how you want to consume this content. Evaluate your current situation, evaluate how you're feeling, and most importantly, once you finish watching, reading, or listening to the news, pay attention on how your body feels. Pay attention if you're tense, pay attention if you're worried, if you're anxious. And once you pay attention to how you're feeling, that will give you a very good idea of what you should be doing next. Honestly, pay attention to your body. That's the best thing you can possibly do. And there is no better advice that I can give you that will bring you a better experience of how we regard the world. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was a pleasure talking with you today. I would like to ask you for a huge favor. Please review this podcast. It will help other people like you find the content that they need. So please review it. And also, I want to wish you a great rest of your day. Sending you a huge hug. Bye-bye.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.